Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of the people in my network. So it's friends, colleagues, new introductions, expanded networks. These are great leads that I'll be interviewing to get to the books that have made them who they are or contributed a lot to who they are, whether it's in their life, in their business, in their work, with their family, whatever it may be. What I'm learning along the way is that these books are applicable as I thought might be the case, applicable across all different segments of your life and work. But in any case, in this series, I cover three categories of books: books that I haven't read that my guest is schooling me on, books that we've read together, whether specifically for this series or in our past lives. And then the third category of books is where I have the authors on or the publishers of books that want to get out their message of what the book is. This one started as a category three. I knew my guest Stephanie had written a book specifically that we'll cover today, but based on the topic and the brevity of the book, it's a great tool. I'm like, okay, even I can get through this quick book before we talk. So I told Stephanie, all right, let's go from category three, where you're telling me about your book, to you'll still lead the conversation, Stephanie, but I have read it and I can kind of provide maybe a little insight or what my experience has been. But in the meantime, let me get to who my guest is. My guest is Stephanie Delfonzo. And with over 20 years of research, integrative hypnotist Stephanie has combined the latest neuroscience with practical and simple skills and techniques to help you live your best life. She's also the author of Goodbye Anxiety, Hello Freedom, which is the book that we're going to be covering today, and that's available on Amazon. Stephanie's first career was as a celebrity radio DJ, Stevie Knox. Back then, she hypnotized her listeners to come back day after day. I'm just trying to picture that, Stephanie, Stevie Knox. For the past 17 years, as an integrative hypnotist, she has been using her voice to literally hypnotize her clients into making incredible life changes. And I met Stephanie through a mutual colleague and friend, Kisha Zullo, who I interviewed for episode 25 of this series. We covered Who Moved My Cheese by Dr. Spencer Johnson. So check out that episode. In any case, Kisha introduced me to Stephanie. I got to talking to Stephanie, saw the work she was doing, read about the book that she wanted to cover, picked it up because I can relate to its need, as I've been honest on this series about. So, Stephanie, thank you so much for sitting down with me for this conversation.
John, thank you. And Keisha, thank you so much for making this introduction. Just in our little pre talk, John, I'm so excited about just having a conversation about this because, I wrote the book 4 years ago. First of all, I never planned on writing a book. I was a DJ, right? My gift is the gift of gab. It's not the gift of writing. But in the beginning, January of 2018, I heard the whisper, so I wrote the book, and literally from that whisper until publishing, it was only 60 days. It was like this
Wow.
download. It was so necessary. And I was telling you before we started recording, John, this has been on my heart for decades because it really the core of it is, yes, it mainly touches adults, but the core of it is these are so simple. You can teach your 6-year-old most of these techniques that are in there, John. And that is where I think really where the seed of this book was born, because I was like, oh my gosh, my life would have been so different, and I'm sure yours would too, John, if we had been taught ways to deal with our emotions in healthy ways when we were kids.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but for me, it was, you want something to cry about? I'll give you something to cry. No, okay, hey, let's take a moment and breathe. So, as we said, I shared with you before we started recording, you've got what, a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 2-month-old.
Yeah.
Your kids, parenting kids in this time, I've earned all of these, I've earned my gray. Parenting in these times are much more challenging than I think ever before because your kids are exposed to so much more stress and anxiety than we were at any point in our lifetime before.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's come up even outside of this series, even outside of the conversations that I've had. In certain of these conversations, the talk of our childhoods. I always knew that your childhood obviously impacts who you are for better or worse, right? But through these conversations and other conversations, especially during the pandemic, when anxiety was coming even more to the forefront and people were coming forward with what they were experiencing, you heard a lot about where it came from, their experiences in childhood. So between the pandemic, it caught up with me between the pandemic, and everything just going on in the world, and you just realize how different my generation is from my father's generation, from my grandfather, and grandmother's generation. I look at it through the lens of the fathers only because that's my role in the house, and that
Right.
was the trickiest part was, okay, what the hell does the role of the father look like this day and age? Because I can't look back to my dad. My dad's role, his example, which if anybody's heard this series, they know how important my dad is to me. His role can only show me so much because it's just such a different effing world. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like I graduated high school in 96 and social media came out. We were starting to use it like in 2006, 2007, right around there. And it's only grown more prolific since there. So it gives us instant access to relationships, instant access to things around the world, across the country, that there's no playbook. So that's why all that stuff came up, or caught up with me, to be honest. But before we get into that, I don't want to lose sight of who you are, Stephanie. So let me go back and just ask you, who are you today? Can you give us a little glimpse of the work that you're doing today? I kept the bio brief just because I want to dive in this conversation. So can you tell us a little more about what you're doing today?
So, how did I go from celebrity radio DJ Stevie Knox, who also, by the way, was the very first automated voice? You're talking about technology, John. Back in the 1980s, I was the first prototype for an automated voice. This was long before we had any idea where technology was taking us. And I'm in a studio saying, to listen to your messages, press one. So my husband, again, I was still a radio DJ. He had hired me, by the way, many years ago. We lived in South Florida at the time, and he'd be traveling around the country. He'd be in Chicago picking up. I would never touch one of these at this day and age, a germy phone in a hotel room, right? But we didn't have cell phones back then. So he'd be picking up this germy phone, hearing me say, listen to your messages, press one, right? So here was this, this technology like way long ago. So how do I make the jump from that to what I'm doing now? It was when we were married, yeah, oh, my career will follow yours. So I followed my husband's career from South Florida to Portland, Oregon to Connecticut, where I am now and have been for the past 20 plus years. And when we landed here in Connecticut, I had been a hot stuff DJ, right? So we landed in Connecticut and I can work at the local radio station for minimum wage. And my ego at the time, that was not going to happen. Or I could go to New York City, but then somebody else would be raising my kids. And that wasn't going to happen. So I was a stay at home mom. And oh, my husband went into liver failure and had to have a liver transplant or he was going to die. And he was in and out of liver failure over a dozen times, like this close to dying. So, all right, great. Here I am with two small kids. I don't have a career anymore. What the heck do I do? So I started school as a life coach because, this was back in the very beginning of the 2000s. That was like cutting edge technology that I could do this on the computer and on the phone. But then in 2004, I really, again, I hear these whispers. I never paid attention to what intuition was then. Um, you really need to check out hypnosis. And so in the state of Connecticut, I could find 2-day workshops where I could go for a weekend and be a certified hypnotist. And I was like, I don't really think that's quite enough training to be able to do that kind of work. So I found a brilliant woman in New York City. And the first day, it was like the skies opened up, the choirs of angels were singing because I had found this incredible way to make these life changes so easily, so gently. And I haven't looked back since. So my struggles with anxiety started this whole process because my last radio show was doing the morning show out in Portland, Oregon. My kids were very small. My youngest was still in diapers. And I developed insomnia. And, we all have our breaking point. Mine was smashing a bag of Cheetos. I don't know if you remember reading that in the book, John, but I found myself at my kitchen counter smashing this bag of Cheetos because I couldn't sleep and I couldn't function. So I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Well, the insomnia is because of your anxiety." And I was like, "What?" Because I didn't realize I had struggled with anxiety my entire life.
Mm,
I thought it was normal to walk around with my shoulders like earrings and constantly worrying, but not just worrying about the worst case scenario every time. So I went on medication and it worked, and then it stopped. And I started like, all right, how am I going to do this on my own? So I started the research. You mentioned in the bio, I've been researching anxiety, all things anxiety and sleep for over 20 years out of self preservation. But then when I started learning hypnosis, it was like, okay, I can help. In some ways, I don't know, this might sound a little too lofty, John, but in a way, sometimes I think of myself as a lighthouse where I'm shining the light to help guide you around the shoals of life, where it's just like, okay, if you know it's here and you can go over here, let me show you where that path is. So again, I never planned on writing this book. And then, oh my gosh, that was in 2018 when I wrote the book. Then 2020 came, and I was like, holy, the
yeah.
world really needs this. And mid, in the beginning of January of 2020, I was contracted to give a talk to a huge organization with over 10,000 members. And it was for mid March. And I'm watching what's going on in the world. And I'm particularly sensitive to it because my husband did end up having a successful liver transplant almost 20 years ago. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But because of that, I've always been on hyper alert. And I was watching what was
Yeah.
happening in Italy. And I was like, so I have a tech check with the woman who I'm going to do this big presentation for in mid March. And I was like, how flexible can you be? And I watched her turn as white as my blouse here, like, oh no, what are you going to do? And I said, you know what? Your members are going to need a lot more than what I have in this presentation. So, with your permission, I'm going to blow up the presentation and just give them skill after skill after skill to be able to help deal with what's coming. And in that time frame, this is really just such a sad bellwether to me, John. From mid-February to mid-March of 2020, prescriptions for anti-anxiety medications rose over 34%. Now, that is not me saying anything about medication because that's out of my wheelhouse. It's more just like that tells you just how bad
Yeah. It's indicative.
it hit.
Yeah.
Yeah, very indicative. And, it was like the whole world, we hear about fight or flight, but it's really fight, flight, or freeze. And from my vantage point, John, it was not fight or flight. I watched as the whole collective globally went, like deer in headlights, like, oh my gosh, we've never been prepared for this. What do we do? And so that's when I just went into action. You know, true, transparency, my business blew up. In March of 2020, my business just, whoosh,
Yeah.
right? So I was like, okay, what can I do? Let's roll up my sleeves. And I gave my presentation to as many nonprofits as I possibly could because I wanted to get the skills out there. And knowing that, what you put out, I've told my kids this, they're grown and flown. I think I'm old enough to be your mother, John, but that's okay. So since you were very little, since my kids were very little, I was always telling them what you put out is what you get back. So here was this opportunity. I had these skills that people really, really needed, and it feeds my soul to be able to share them.
Yeah. I I can't imagine being in your shoes and something like that hits. And like we said, yeah, it's an indicator of what's coming. And I can only imagine that it went up from there, those kind of indicators, only because so many of us had this impression that it was going to be something temporary. that if we go
Oh,
home in
it was gonna be a
March,
couple of weeks.
it's going to be a couple weeks. Here we are, I don't know, what, 24,
Over 2 years
27.
later.
It's and now it's the norm. Are we coming out of it? Are we not? Um, but it just, yeah, it kind of put everything on pause, and you're looking around saying, okay, what is the new normal? So it's just amazing that that happened, but it's great that people have the kind of tools that you can offer. So for you, Stephanie, what was it from your past that kind of, it didn't lead you down your path? Because it doesn't seem from what you tell me that you knew you were going to end up here, right, doing this. You took that hard left turn a couple, way back when. But is there anything that from your childhood, whether it was your parents, your education, relative experience, that kind of leads you to where you are now, where it does make sense that this is what you're doing?
Exactly. So in the very beginning of the book, I touched on ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And this was an incredible study of 17,000 adults. It was done by the Centers for Disease Control and Kaiser Permanente. So it's not airy fairy me pulling this, out of the ethers. There's a really robust research study that was done back in the 1990s, and it just kind of sat on the shelf and was collecting dust. And I learned about this adverse childhood experiences study, which I'll explain in a second. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I include it in the book. Nobody's really talking about it. 3 days before I published my book, it was on a Tuesday in March of 2018. 3 nights before, Oprah Winfrey was on 60 Minutes telling the world about the Adverse Childhood Experiences study.
And Stephanie,
And
can you
it
just break
is,
that out, what it means for people that are listening and watching?
oh, yeah, yeah. So ACEs, if you want to look it up, it's ACEs, ACE, small s, Adverse Childhood Experiences. So it's this quick little 10-question quiz. And again, Google it, you'll find it online. 10 simple questions. Did you experience this before the age of 18? Now, this is not, you don't want to score high on this. Like, you don't, right? I did. I'm an overachiever. So I take this test and I scored very high on this. And it's asking about abuse in the home, whether it was physical, sexual, emotional abuse. It's talking about addiction. It's talking about, did you lose a parent? And ka-ching, 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 I hit 6 out of 10. Now, this study shows, and again, it's not just, like I knew this as a hypnotist before I learned about this study, but now I had something I could really prove to and say, okay, this happens in childhood. This is how it affects you in your adulthood. So they came to understand that if you score 4 or more on this test, this quiz, there is a direct correlation to the chances that you're going to be obese, you're going to have addictions, you're going to have, health issues, whether it's physical with, your heart and stuff, or mental, where it's, again, the addictions or suicidal. Um, Direct correlation. This happens in childhood, this happens in adulthood. What's refreshing to me is because that's like, okay, what's refreshing about that, Steph? What's refreshing is you can change it. Like
Yeah.
just because you experience this, think about how many incredible, motivational speakers we've heard in our lifetime where, they've gone through these horrendous childhoods only to come out as, incredible. And I didn't have that great a childhood. If I'm telling you I scored 6 out of 10 on this thing, you can only imagine. It was so, but that's all you know. That's all I knew, right? So as I, experienced smashing my kids' Cheetos and I started on this, I was like, oh, okay, what I thought was normal might not be normal. And so, I think that you get a choice, you deal with what you have and you get to make a choice and rise above it, or which I'm not willing to do, go sit in the corner and cry.
Yeah.
So, again, I'm not like, oh, poor me, because people have had worse childhoods, people have had better childhoods. It is what it is. But had I been taught some of these skills as a kid, um, it would have been things would have been different, which is why I have such a passion for, you've got a 6-year-old, John, start teaching them now.
Yeah.
Okay, we're having a meltdown. Okay, let's take a time out. What's right now? And I'm going to
Yeah.
ask you, John. I'm going to ask you,
Sure.
what's right now?
What do you mean?
What's right now in your life?
What, like, what's working out right now
What's right in this moment? What's right?
that we're having this conversation?
What else?
That I enjoy having this conversation.
Okay. So what's right now is to get you out of, and I'm not saying you, just you, I'm talking the collective you, but
Yeah.
it is to get us out of damn doom scrolling, which is
Mm,
so prevalent, right? It's this constant banging on our nervous system, doom, 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 and so what's right
yeah.
now brings us into the present moment. And so what's right now for me is I'm having a great conversation with you. I have the love of my life, my sweet rescue dog Maggie down here snoring on the floor. I've got plenty of food in the pantry. My husband and
Mm,
I, our kids, we're all healthy. So when we can interrupt, and that's one of my favorite things when I think about for kids, is life's going on, and you say, okay, everybody, we're going to take a time out. What's right now?
yeah. No, that's a good one, and it's a simple one.
Yeah,
And before we started recording this, we had talked about, how can someone assist? Do they have to be the level of a doctor? Obviously, it goes without saying that for certain things, you should be a doctor. But you and I have talked about, even in that brief conversation, just the power of conversation, the
yeah,
power of asking questions of ourselves, of others. I've talked about on this podcast how many times with coaching clients, I've asked what I thought were simple, straightforward, everyday kind of questions. And they look at me and say, no one's ever asked me that before. And in
yeah,
my mind, I'm kind of like, what the hell are we talking about that? Not me and that person, but just in general. Are we
yeah,
just passing along information, reporting out what's happened to us in our lives, what's happened in the day? I try to not do that. I don't like just saying, if I ask my wife or she asks me, how was your day? I don't want to just say what happened. I want to go beyond that, ask additional questions. But there's just such a power. And when you were asking me, I was doing my best to, I know what's right, but I've been trying to, based on exercises for anxiety, based on what you shared in your book, think about the here and now. Because you're
yeah,
right. I mean, it wasn't until the pandemic where I realized I always knew I had anxiety, but functioning with it, but I didn't realize what mine looked like until the pandemic hit. Do you know what I mean? So I know how kind of scrambled my head can be, thinking of the past, thinking of the future, what's going on now, so I'm doing my very best, like you said, what's right now? Like, what is it right in front of you? And when I felt my most calm is when I am in those moments, when I am in flow in that great conversation, or when I was heavy into photography doing that, or when I was heavy into whatever it may be, playing music. But just getting lost in that moment and appreciating what you have in front of you. And again, those are just simple questions you can ask yourself. And as I'm reading all this stuff, especially your book, the last one I read about it, I do think about how it gets conveyed to kids. What are those little tools that you can provide to them that I never had as a kid? I
yep,
was a child of immigrants. They came to this country to give my sister and I the best of what they could. Blue collar workers, you put your nose to the grindstone and you work to pay the bills. You love your kids. You make sure they're doing right. You send them to college to make sure they do better than you. But those everyday conversations, those everyday coping conversations, we never had any of that. You know what I
yeah. But
mean?
John, I do. And my question to you would be, after having these deeper conversations, how many people have you come across that really do say, oh, yeah, I was raised where we have these conversations? I haven't really run into that many
Yeah.
people.
Well, I mean, because the idea has always been, I don't know what, we can talk about where that started, but the idea is always about keeping that facade of control.
Yeah,
Like in school, if you get an F, like, okay, now you have like your scarlet letter, like you failed, you're less than. So already there's that kind of separation. I've even seen it in kids playing sports, my kids' age, 5, 6 years old, where they already have that kind of, not to go into that now, but that kind of toxic masculinity about winning, like me versus you. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying there's anything wrong with that. It all depends who the coaches are and whatnot. But all of these seeds get planted when we're so young, and it just kind of grows exponentially as we get older. And the Stephanie, the crazy thing about me is I've known it for a while that I had that anxiety, but it's amazing when that's all you know.
Yes. And so I'm curious, John, when that's all you knew, did you realize that there was another possibility?
Yeah, but I mean, I think depending on what your anxiety level is, or what type, or what its history is, what your experiences are, when it's certain kinds of anxiety, you feel like that is your world. Do you know what I mean? And it kind of envelops you. You kind of sense it everywhere you are. You can look at other people and say, they don't look as tense as I do. Maybe they speak up a little more than I do. So you know that there are different ways that you can live your life. But if I haven't lived that other person's experience, and I'm talking generally in the past, this is the way I would think to myself. If I haven't lived that person's experiences, I can't feel like that, whatever my perception was. So I think when you're in it, when you feel it so deeply and it's just a part of who you are, I think it's hard to see. That it's there, and you could say, okay, right now I'm going to start feeling this way. I'm going to work in that direction. But when it's all you've ever known, it's like your body, for instance, speaking. We were all terrified of speaking. You say you're a chatty person, you were a DJ. I don't know if you ever had a problem with public speaking. Some people, they seem never to have that issue. I never loved public speaking. I was one of those people that was very timid, very shy. And then when it got to a point where I was talking about coaching, that turned around. The reason I bring that up is that even though I enjoy it for that split second, my body's like, no, this isn't
It's
us.
not
Like,
safe.
my
It's
body
not
has been
safe.
so programmed to have that fear that even though my mind is like, no, 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 we're going to do this, that reptilian brain is still like, no, remember all that fear that we ever held. So it's incredible that even though I may want to speak for that split second, just that split second, my body's like, it kind of just skips a beat of my heart. But after that, I'm fine. But it's incredible that even though I enjoy it, I still have that slight hesitation because my body's just so accustomed to just holding back and maybe sometimes just shutting down.
Well, and it's interesting. There's two things that are coming to my mind, John. First of all, I have seen over and over and over and over again over the years that a lot of times our fears, phobias, whatever, are passed down. I have often said anxious kids have anxious moms. And I say moms because it's usually the moms, you know, of course, sometimes it is the dads, but, in our traditional, societal, that the moms are usually the caregivers. I can almost, if I have a kid that's struggling with anxiety or a fear, I can almost guarantee mom is too. And so I have a pediatrician, a local pediatrician in my town. I haven't worked in person for 7 years now. I was way ahead of the curve with the virtual. But so for over a decade, I've had this pediatrician who has been sending me her patients that have fears of, usually it's needles or something to do with the doctor. Excuse me, I wasn't prepared for this, but look at this. This was a young girl who used to have to be held down to get needles by two adults, kicking and screaming. And
Stephanie, say that one more time. For whatever reason, it kind of got jumbled up. What was that?
okay, sorry. She used to have to be held down by two adults to get shots. And there she was. You can see it's during the pandemic, she's got her mask on and receiving her shot, calm as day. And so this doctor has, sent me all her kids with these different fears, because once they're gone, they're gone. And many times I have seen, and it's not always shots. She sent me a kid with a fear of bees, a 14-year-old. I loved this girl, a 14-year-old who had a fear of dogs. And so I was already working virtually at the time, and I said to the mom, "We'll start online." Kids love doing stuff online. This was pre-pandemic, so this was new. But when she's okay, I want you to bring her to my house because again, she was local. I said, on when I know she's good, I want you to bring her to my house because I want to have her last session be at my house so she can have her first introduction to a dog with my sweet girl Maggie.
Mhm.
So the last session, she came to my house. The mother came back, and here she is sitting on my couch with my dog next to her. Mom's got tears streaming down her face. She, at the time, was a brand new ninth grader who was a cheerleader. And we're working on her fear of dogs, John. Okay. We're working on her fear of dogs. After her first session with me, she says, "Oh, I was able to do a backflip in front of my coach that I'd never been able to do before." Well, that's pretty cool. After the second session, I know she's good. So we scheduled the third appointment to be at my home. And her mom reaches out and says, "Oh, you're not going to believe it. This kid, brand new, in the fall of her freshman year, got a spot on the varsity cheerleading squad, right? That doesn't happen. Again, we're working on her fear of dogs. She comes to my house, great. We had been prepping for her to be able to go to a Halloween party where there were going to be dogs walking around the house. So she goes to the party, piece of cake, no problem. Mom sends me an email a couple weeks later and she goes, "This is absolutely amazing. She stopped throwing up on competition days." Now, no one ever told me that the girl was throwing up
Mhm.
on competition day. I was not focusing on her being a cheerleader. The root cause for her fear of dogs had nothing to do with the dog, John. It was from when she was like 4 or 5 years old, having her first dance recital. That's stage fright. Like, how can you make that up? Like, how can you ever, you got a fear of dogs? It's because there's something to do with dogs. But it's not. It's finding out where that root cause is and healing it, and how that root cause, whatever it may be, can go out into all these different directions. It was just like that one, just, I will always remember her because it was so
Yeah. 'Cause
incredible.
I think most of them, maybe you can kinda trace it back to something that makes sense, but when they're that disconnected, they're that disparate, where they seemingly don't have any kind of relation at all.
Well, and a lot of times, when adults come to me for, say, a fear of driving, and you would be amazed at how common that is. People who have a fear of driving always feel like they're the only ones. And if you have a fear of driving, you are not. I have dealt with so many people over the years. So I would say probably at least 50%, probably more than that of the time, it goes back to a childhood experience where maybe you were in the back seat of the car. Dad, I can remember this one, he was uh, um, merging onto the highway from the left-hand side instead of the right. Full-blown panic attack, had to pull over to the side of the road, switch places with mom. So here's this 50-something-year-old man, but he had this incredible fear of driving. And it was because he was in the back seat. I mean, it's just incredible. This is where I get so fascinated about how um, every cell in our body every 7 years has been replaced. It's a different time, depending on the part of the body, but that every 7 years we have brand new cells in our body. So there is not one cell that was in our 7-year-old body, but somehow that cellular memory still remains into our adulthood. And so that's where like the exciting stuff for me comes in, because it's like I am almost like a little detective. I have this wonderful gift of being able to find out, okay, where's the root of this? Where did this start? Oh, okay, now we change it. Then going back to the adverse childhood experiences study, this happened in childhood. Let's heal it in a very gentle way and allow your trajectory to be different. So again, tying back into the adverse childhood experiences study, even if you score high on it, doesn't mean that that's like, oh, this is definitely going to happen. It's, oh, here's a potential. Let's see how we can change that for you.
So, Stephanie, so what from your background then, because like that jump from DJ to the work you're doing now, how do you reconcile that? It's weird. I mean, you gave us the answer where it's like, you kind of, this is what life put in front of you, but if you look back at your life, your younger life, and aside from the anxiety that you have yourself, this is a very specialized work. So what was it from your past that if you look back at your past, could you say, okay, it makes sense that I would end up here? Aside from your own anxiety, your own experience with it, like seeing examples of people being helped. I mean, this is just such a specialized
God,
area.
that is probably one of the best questions I've ever been asked, John. And I've never been asked it, so I've never connected this dot.
Okay.
Like, so this is like huge for me that you just asked this. But I think my response to that is that as a kid, I didn't have anybody helping me. I didn't have anybody nurturing and loving me. Which is why I threw myself into motherhood. Oh my God, I did everything I possibly could to be the best mother. Guess what?
Yeah.
Excuse me, John, if you have to bleep this out, but oops, I fucked up. I wasn't the perfect mom. But I think in answer to your question, it was because as a kid, I didn't have that help. And so that's why I threw myself into motherhood. I think that's why I was drawn to this because it's so simple. And I know, when you're on the other side of it, it's like, yeah, no, you don't know what I've been through. This isn't simple. But I can tell you from experience now, oh my God, it really can be simple. And it doesn't have to hurt. That's the thing. I think for me, I got to a point in my life, and ooh, John, you're really bringing some stuff out here. Never shared this before either. I can remember a very specific time in my life where I felt like I was at an abyss. And I knew that if I fell into that, I was really in a lot of trouble. And so I clawed my way to keep from that edge of going down. And I think that part of that is just because, and I've heard this now, it's not just, my own experience, but I've heard it from enough clients that it's like, oh my God, if I open up that door, am I going to be able to handle it? And
Yeah.
I am here to tell you, yes, and that it has to be with a proper person. I worked
Mm.
with a therapist, before I learned about hypnosis and how simple things could be. I worked with a therapist who was trying to get me to re experience the trauma I had experienced as a child. What is wrong
Oof.
with you? What
Yeah.
is wrong with you? Right? I am not faulting therapy. There are phenomenal therapists that
Hmm.
help people in incredible ways. But in any profession, there are people who are really good at their craft and there are people who are not so good. And I unfortunately went to somebody who was not so good. And the upside of that, because I'm always looking for, all right, what's the upside of something? The upside was, John, that I know, as sure as I know I've got my heart beating here, I know that healing doesn't have to hurt. I know that you do not need to re experience trauma, that you can heal the trauma without experiencing it again. And that, to me, is the most wonderful, liberating thing possible. That, oh, I can get through this and not have to go through all that pain and anguish again. Okay, where do I sign up?
Well, I mean, that's awesome because it's not like you're ignoring it. It's not like you're putting it off. It's not like you're pretending it never existed. Obviously, it's carved into you, your experience that stays with you. Uh, but at least it's not ignoring it. It's using that power of that impact that it had on you and re-guiding, reshifting that energy. But that's better than people that just kind of block it out. It's in the recesses of their memory and it stays there and that's it.
Well, and I've had people over the years say, "Can you help me have amnesia for this?" And it's like, no. And first of all, that comes from, have you ever been to a stage hypnosis show, John?
I mean college. So I mean,
Okay.
probably,
No,
probably wasn't too legit, but yeah.
well, it is legit in that, like, okay, wait, how is it that they got them to forget their name? But it's all smoke and mirrors, right? And it's a hypnotic suggestion. You get done with the show and say, "What's your name?" And you're going to say John, right? So it's just a short amount of time. I do have the ability to help you have amnesia for something. I would never do that because it's a part of your history. But the true gold in that is when you remember, yeah, all right, that happened, but it no longer has a charge.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I was going to say,
That,
even if you could give them amnesia for the specifics, would they still have the general feeling and sensation of that experience?
I don't know because I've never actually I've never
Okay.
actually
Okay.
done that.
Okay.
But
Just curious. I'm just asking for a friend.
well,
Just asking for
and
a friend.
so we have the cellular memory, that I mentioned a few moments ago, that cellular memory stays with us.
Yeah.
The oldest person I've worked with so far was 82 years old.
Wow.
82 years old. This woman, I will always stand in awe of her that she had struggled with this her entire life. And she saw there was a little mention in our local newspaper that there was a health fair coming up. And they mentioned me talking about how hypnosis is incredible for helping with irritable bowel syndrome. So here's this teeny tiny little Nana that comes to the YMCA when we're having this health fair and says, "Can you really help me with this?" And I said, "I can't make any guarantees, but I feel reasonably sure I can." Well, no surprise, 82 years old, it went back to her childhood and the trauma that she had experienced. We did the healing work. At 82 years old, she got her freedom. So from like 5 years old to
Mm.
82, this cellular memory of this trauma was still encoded in her. And at 82, she was like, "I don't want to live like this anymore." So I get a email from her saying, "Guess what? I knew I made a mistake. And for the first time in my life, it didn't matter. I was okay." So that cellular memory stays in us. Um, so that's, I help recode that, but I don't want to have you have amnesia for it because I don't want you to forget that because it's an integral building block of who we are
Yeah.
today.
Which I agree. I agree. That's why it's what you do is a good blend of knowing, remembering that it's there, but utilizing it in a different way. It's affecting you in a different way. It's driving you in a different way going forward. So
Yeah.
that's why I think that's a great mix. But Stephanie, why don't we jump into your book? If you could just introduce the book and just share with us what we'll find. Well, share with the listeners and the viewers what they'll find in there. I already read through it. I have my copy right here, but why don't you break it down for us?
Look at that. Two copies.
Yeah.
Woo! Okay. Look how thin this is. This is like the most important thing is that it's thin, and it's thin for a reason. Because if you're struggling with anxiety and I hand you a 400-page book, you're going to go
Yeah.
into, overwhelm with it. Then let's break it down even further. And I think I said this to you in an email, John. It's not even meant to be read from cover to cover, right?
Hmm.
This is only 100 pages, right? It's meant to read the two very first short chapters in the beginning, which just introduce the concepts, lets you know where it came from. And then I don't know if you notice this, John, but all of the techniques are in alphabetical order. And
Yes, I
it's
did.
literally so you just peruse. You don't even have to read the whole thing. Just peruse through and say, huh, okay, what's this one? So, John, what's one of the techniques that jumped out for you?
Oh man, several of them. Um, I I've always known that exercise is going to do the job, like a rigorous workout, getting your heart rate up. And just from reading it, and to me, I just tie it back to like our primitive minds. For me, anxiety is just about energy. For whatever reason, there's energy in my body that I need to get out. Stephanie, and I love that I have you on here because anxiety comes up in so many different conversations that I have on this series. And for me, it's I've just realized how old our species is, right? I'm
And that
not an
we're still
anthropologist.
wired the same way.
I'm not an anthropologist. I don't know the specifics of it, but we're talking like hundreds of thousands of years, different iterations, Homo sapiens, even Homo sapiens, I think, is like a couple 100,000 years, something to that effect. The society that we work in, the society that we live in, just the technology that we have has only been the way it is. Think about social media. That's only for the last 15, 16 years.
Right.
So it's like we're taking in so much in a short amount of times, like that evolution of social media, we're just hit with so much. We're not traveling in packs anymore. We're not traveling, gathering and hunting and none of that. Now we're in separate houses. It's just for me, it's really struck home how old we are as a species versus we're existing in an environment it's not in our programming. It's not supposed to be in our programming. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? We're like in
And we're
separate
still
houses, and we
and we're
have this
still
instant access to all these threats around the world. And like you said, we don't live in the moment. Back then, it was about, Maslow's hierarchy. What do you need? Your safety, your security, your food. And that should be all we need to worry about. But we've elevated society where now we have these additional concerns. That's what I'd love to hear you talk about. And I'm sorry, you were just about to say
no, no,
something.
no. So we're still wired the way we were when we were living in caves, right? So
Yeah.
we've got that fight, flight, or freeze syndrome. And now it's constant. It's constant. It's constant. And there is no escaping it. I was very privileged to be in a conference called Mindfulness in America in New York City several years ago. And I'm sitting in this teeny tiny little theater in New York City with some of the top names in the mindfulness movement, with some of the top names in tech, including Tony Fadell, who was the inventor of the iPod. If you remember, that was the first iteration of any kind of iPhone or whatever. It
I
was the
remember it.
iPod and it was the music, right?
Yep.
So here is Tony Fadell, who invented this, who was involved in the first three generations of the iPod. And he's saying, I'm wondering if my kids, my grandkids, are going to say, oh, yeah, he's the one who ruined society.
Yeah, I remember you wrote that in the book and covered it in the book. Yeah.
And so throughout that entire day, person after person after person is saying, oh, by the way, these are intentionally addictive, right? Oh, all those ding, ding, dings, all those notifications are hitting you with a dopamine hit. And the
Yeah.
more dopamine, by the way, if you're not familiar with what that is, it is a happy hormone that, like, when we are addicted to something, whether it's, you know, Cheetos or, chocolate chips or alcohol or whatever, when we get that dopamine hit, we want more of it. So literally, they are designing these to be addictive. So the more you get those hits, the more you want them. And I'm sitting in this little tiny theater, John, and I'm like, oh, I have a very different relationship with my phone than anybody else in this theater. My phone is off 99% of the time. The only time that it ever makes a sound is if I'm expecting a phone call, so I turn it on, or that if I like to start my sessions with a good minute, where literally I set the timer for 60 seconds and we just take a good minute, whatever
Yeah.
that looks like to you. And then at the end of either one of them, it's a little ding, a little Zen bell chime. So I don't like, not because I heard this, about it being addictive. It was just something I knew, like, ooh, this is not good for me. And so I've had clients where I'll say, okay, can you take like 7 days and turn those off? No. Okay. Can we turn off this part for 3 days, like negotiating? How do we just minimize it a little bit? But the technology is ruling us these days. And there are, like with anything, there's the yin and the yang, there's the good and the bad, right? So there's incredible, like if it weren't for technology, John, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation, right? So there are benefits to it, but it's, to me, it's all right. How do we find our way? How do we navigate taking time? For me, it's taking time in nature. It's being out bike riding or being at the beach and having the darn thing turned off. So, one of the techniques in the book is to take a digital timeout. And even if
Yeah.
that digital timeout is simply 5 minutes, take 5 minutes and notice what's around you. If you can get out in nature, great. If you can, if you can't, if you can just sit. And again, one of the techniques from the book is heart breathing. So if you just take a moment now, and you can do this eyes open or eyes closed, just let your awareness come to your heart and simply imagine that you're breathing in and out of your heart. Now, we know we're not actually moving air in and out of our heart, but the Heart Math Institute has discovered over the years, like 10 or 20 years of research, that there's more electromagnetic coherence in our heart than there is in our brain. So that when we bring our awareness to our heart and we imagine breathing in and breathing out of our heart, that it brings our brain and our heart into coherence, and it helps calm the anxiety.
Yeah.
Simple.
No. Yeah, it makes sense. And you had said these were in alphabetical order. I had made notes on which ones I starred which ones I use the most. And then I made notes on just other ones that I've experienced in the past. And just to give people it's I'll go through maybe 10 and just list them. I won't go into like most of them are straightforward in their title as to what they may mean. The first one was exercise. The second one is gratitude. I realized that I was too much on cruise control, working towards the future. My friends say ambitious in this project, ambitious in that project, getting frustrated at certain points, right? As we all do. And I wasn't taking time to realize how far I've come in terms of what I've achieved. So it's kind of getting out of that reactive mode and just kind of taking a moment um, to just look at what I do have. And it's not even a matter of thank you. For me, it's just a matter of taking stock of what I have. It's not just saying thank you, thank you, thank you. It's really realizing what went into the things that I already have. I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out, breathing exercises. It's amazing as a person with that's dealt with anxiety. It's amazing how shallow my breathing is because as you know, throughout your life, if
It's
you're
all up here, right?
it's it's all up here. Your body's tense, and it's amazing. And I what's that book? Breathe by James Nestor. I recommend
Yeah,
that
yeah,
because there's a
yep.
lot of breathing exercises in that as well. It just talks about it breaks down the history of breathing and what it really means and what it means for your body. Um, jump off the what if train. I've gotten pretty good at that. I think maybe it's from my stoic reading where it's just kind of like, listen, you do the best you can. Whatever happens is going to happen. And the Four Agreements is another book where it's kind of like, just do the
Oh,
best you can. And it's this compilation of all these similar topics, but different authors just put it in a very clear way in their own wording. Your book as well, Stephanie. Um, listen to music. Just yawn. Uh, uh, just yawn seems like a funny one, but it's such a reset.
can I explain why?
Yeah, sure, sure. And listen, if you want to explain any of these, I was just kind of going through the
Oh,
ones
John,
that the high
we'd
points.
go through the whole
I know,
day. Like
I
I
know,
just
I
want to
know.
jump in on all of them.
Go
But
ahead, just
okay,
yawn.
I want you to yawn. Just come on, let me see. I
This
want to
is
see
like
you do a
I can't
big
now.
yawn,
I can't.
just a fake yawn.
This is the
Give
one I
me,
can.
give me. There you go. Yeah. Okay. Our brains do not know the difference between real and imagined. I can go through this whole exercise. I don't have time now, but I go through this whole exercise in my presentations to prove that our brains don't know the difference between real and imagined. So that when we yawn, whether it's an involuntary yawn or a fake yawn like this, the same thing happens and it stimulates the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in your body. It goes from your brain down into your belly and encircles all of our organs. And it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest, digest, and relax nervous system. So, a simple gesture of, even if it's a fake yawn, still does the same thing. It stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms us down and rests us. So that sleep is a humongous issue, much bigger, just like anxiety, much bigger than it's ever been in my lifetime. People with sleep issues. So it's socially acceptable to yawn now, whether you're in an in-person meeting, you're on Zoom, doing this, and nobody's going to think you're being rude or you're bored. They're just going to think, oh, they didn't have a good night's sleep again. So when I see clients and stifle it, it's like, oh no, let it out. I want to see you yawn.
Yeah.
So sorry, continue, but I
No,
had
no,
to
no, not at
explain
all,
that.
not at all. You explained it much better than I could have, at all, so thank you. I don't have any pets, but I can understand the pet your pet. Read when you get lost. Again, that's one of those things where you can get in flow when you get lost in a book, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, whatever it may be, or a good article. It just kind of keeps you focused. You're not thinking of the past, thinking of the future, or what if kind of thing. The one here's a top one is the self talk, because I've gotten to the point where if I start feeling a certain way, it's like, okay, stop, hard stop. And it's funny, this method came up in a previous episode. I think where I was talking about happiness and I was talking about my anxiety, this kind of thing, and where I stop and think about, okay, in the past, what has this gotten you? And what's interesting was literally maybe a few minutes late before that, I had spoken about my son and his fears, and I said, "Listen, buddy, you're afraid of the dark. I get it completely, but what's ever happened for a couple of years now? You've had that fear, but can you at least think about what's ever happened when you close your eyes? Have you ever been unsafe or anything like that?" He's like, "No, daddy." So then when I was coming back to my anxiety and I said that I have that self-talk, the woman that I was speaking to was like, "Yeah, just like you were a child, like just remembering that, learning from your past." So I've gotten to the point where it's like, listen, this is BS. Um, this concern, this anxiety in the past hasn't gotten you anything. There's nothing to
Right.
fear but fear itself. And that kind of plays into what I was talking about before, where it's like it's hard when it's all that you've ever known, but it's not the only thing that's out there. You know that you don't want it to be that way. But that's one that has picked up in like the last 5, 6 years, is kind of just, all right, what you're starting to feel right now, that doesn't really take you anywhere. And the other one that stands out very highly is, or the two, take a digital timeout and what's right. And take a digital timeout is just interesting because I found that just taking that digital time out, it's not so much about what that does or doesn't, it's what I'm missing out on. I feel like if I'm paying too much attention to the digital, I'm not focusing on what I need in the moment, what I should be doing in the moment, how I should be relaxing, what's in front of me. So I'm trying to be more present. So yeah, that gives you, I think that was about 10. That just gives you an idea of what Stephanie's book has in terms of exercises. And these are everyday tools that you can utilize every day. Just advice. I mean, I love that this is, as you said, so short that it's like a toolkit. So that if I ever have those moments where I'm like, okay, let me see, let me just go back and remember certain things, you can just open it up and go to the tool that helps you the most, the exercise that helps you the most.
Well, and it's interesting because um, you would imagine, being the former radio DJ, that I would have an audio version of my book, and I don't, for this specific reason. Of course, if you want to get the Kindle, but I highly recommend the paperback over the Kindle because Kindle, it's going to just hide away on your phone. When you've got the actual book sitting on your nightstand or on your coffee table or whatever, and it's there, it reminds you to pick it up and say, oh, yeah, I can do this, instead of it becoming self help, shelf help. Like,
Yeah.
how many books and programs, and we used to buy cassette tapes. How many of these things did we buy, or did I buy over the years? Tens of thousands of dollars, where I would buy this because this was going to be the answer, and it would go up on the shelf, and then the shelves would be like this. So, one thing that I really stress is just pick maybe three of the techniques and then action them again and again and again,
Yeah.
because just saying, oh, well, that was nice, and yawning, or doing any of the techniques that I share in my programs, you know just doing it one time isn't going to help. You have to do it again
Yeah.
and again and again, so that when life throws you a curveball, which we know it will, then we're already prepped and we can go, okay, let me come to my breath. Something you've come to many times in this conversation, John, is worrying about the future, mulling over the past. If we go centuries back to the philosopher Lao Tzu, he said that anxiety is worrying about the future, depression is mulling over the past. And that really the key, and again, he was centuries ago that the key is coming into the moment. And it doesn't
Mm.
mean that we're always
Yeah.
in the moment. It's, oh, finding those opportunities in the middle of this stress to be able to just say, oh, stop and do whatever technique will help you to come back into the present. And then it's like filling your gas tank,
Yeah.
only not a breath is not $5 a gallon. Thank
It's
you.
not over. It's not $5.18.
Right. Well, I said that, and all of a sudden I could hear people getting anxious, going, but it's over $5 a
Yeah.
gallon now.
Yeah. So what are the ones that you go to, Stephanie? I know, or what can you
Oh
share?
my
Because I
gosh.
just based on what you wrote in the book, I have an idea. But what are the ones that you, as your specialist of this work? I'm assuming like any other coach needs a coach, therapist, a therapist. You obviously need some kind of guidance and reminder for yourself. What are the ones that you go to?
Exercise is huge, 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 huge. And I learned this, that's only recent in the past couple of years. It's because I had 3 really days at the beginning of the pandemic. And I realized, wow, I'm not moving my body very much. I was only moving about 2,000 steps a day. And I was like, okay, I don't think that's good. Walk your talk here, kiddo. And
Yeah.
so I started upping my walking, and I walk and I bike ride every single day. Um, Quite happy to say that as of this morning, that has resulted in a drop of 35 pounds. And it's not,
Congrats.
thank you.
That's amazing.
It's not that I'm looking to drop the weight. It's not that I'm looking to get to a certain number. It started out of self-preservation because I know that when I'm in movement, literally the Latin root of the word emotion is to move.
Hmm.
And so when we move, we're not just moving our physical body, we're able to move our emotions. So exercise for me, nature. Nature is like absolute. Excuse me, I'm going to reach over here. I found this in nature the other day. It's a hawk
Nice.
feather. Now, I've got a real thing for hawks and messages, and I just happened to find this hawk feather coincidentally in this, off this path. I went off a path, and I was like, oh my gosh, look at this. So, exercise, nature, and breath work. Oh my
Mm,
gosh.
those are
All it
huge.
takes is one moment to say, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. Even if that's all you can do, it's going to immediately bring it down at least a little bit. And then that can give you room to decide where you go next.
Yeah. Yeah, those are good ones. I can relate to all of them. The exercise, like I said, when you feel that anxiety, it's amazing when you have a good workout at the gym or wherever it may be. And when you're done, even when I've tried to remember what I was stressing about, it's hard,
Yeah.
because your body physiologically is just in a different state that it was before you started.
Well, because
Nature,
you've moved that anxiety out. You
yeah,
have literally moved that anxiety
yeah.
out of your physical
I just
body.
always look at it as burning off. That
Yeah, I love that.
if I feel anxiety for myself, it's that I need to get moving. I need to begin creating, just burning off that energy. And it can be physical, it can be mental, but it's about getting in some kind of state of flow where I kind of get lost and just not avoid it, not ignore it, not put it on the back burner. But for me, I've learned it is this excess energy that I need to get out of my body. And for me, it all comes back to our primitive ancestors. It's programmed in our bones, it's programmed in our DNA. We can't just stay stagnant. That if I feel that anxiety, it's because I don't feel like I'm in control of what's happening, that I have to be proactive. I can't just sit there and react. So the exercising, the nature's huge because if I go to the beach, just staring out at the ocean, it's like you feel this small in a good way. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like everything else that we stress about or we're anxious about, it's like we self-make. So when you go to like the side of the ocean, you're seeing the waves come in, you're like, wow, like everything else is this small and it's stuff that kind of we create. And then the breathing, as I mentioned with that book, it's so much of a reset. The example that you gave, the demonstration of the exercise, I think we forget how to do it. And anytime I've mentioned or said anything about reading or read anything about sorry, breathing, just doing a simple exercise for me as a shallow, anxious breather, like just taking in that breath and exhaling it fully, it does wonders. So I can relate completely to the three that you listed.
Well, and something that also is not in the book. I mean, I could have done a 400-page book, but so there's 35 in the book, but then there's like at least another 35 plus that I've got, and that would be for the breath. You take the breath in, and if you exhale twice as long, you're automatically resetting your nervous system.
Yeah.
How simple is that? Like another point I wanted to make when you were talking about the exercise is I can hear people saying, oh, I don't have time to exercise. We're not talking a chunk of time. We're not talking
Mm,
about having to go to the gym. We're not talking about having to go out and do a half hour, an hour walk. I think we would both agree, John, that it's just a question of getting up and moving. Even if that is, I have a client who, I mentioned we start with a good minute. And she has taken that on to be, all right, she completes a task and she sets her timer for a good minute and she'll get up and just walk away from her desk and walk in her
mm,
office or walk in place for 60 seconds. That's all
yeah.
it takes. And so out of this whole beautiful conversation we've had, John, I think the top takeaway I would hope that your listeners would get is that wherever you are, just start and start small. Simple shifts are what create lasting change. It doesn't have to be this big change
Yeah.
because when you start with that big change, it's not sustainable. So pick one of the things that we shared today and action it, action it, action it. And I can tell you things will start shifting.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, that's society. That's the way we are. We're just programmed for instant gratification, instant results. We want to see it now. But yeah, I would implore anybody listening and watching, just start with any of these exercises in Stephanie's book. Um, just a little bit at a time. I'm like that too. You want to see whatever the results are you're seeking, you want to see them right away, but you make it that habit day by day, go a little longer, work a little harder, whatever it may be, whatever you choose to do. And it comes, but it has to be that constant practice of just going a little bit at a time.
Right, right. And then it becomes a habit. And once it becomes a habit, then you can start making it bigger.
Yeah.
So when I realized, ooh, I'm only moving about 2,000 steps a day, I didn't go to where I am today. Um, I'm at 15,000 steps a day now.
Yeah.
Now, that took me 2 years to build up to, and I'm good. My friend, when I shared that with yesterday, she was like, she had told me the story a while ago about somebody who was obsessive and was walking around her apartment 60,000 steps a day, and she was, emaciated. She was like, "You're not going there, are you?" I said, "No, I'm good at 15,000. Thank you."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so and I share that not like, oh, let me pat myself on the back that it's 15,000, but so that your listeners understand, okay, so maybe I added another 100 steps the next day. And then, and oh, guess what? There were some days I didn't hit it. And I didn't use that self voice, that self talk that you mentioned earlier. I didn't use that to beat myself up and like, oh, you're a loser and that's it. You know, now go back to day one. Um, Celebrate, you talk about gratitude, celebrate your wins. When you like, okay, I don't get up and move, and you get up and you move for 5 minutes. If you're sitting on the couch and you're watching TV at night and you have a can of soup in each hand,
Yeah.
that counts.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
counts just as much as walking or going to the gym or whatever. It's movement. And the more we can physically move our bodies, the easier it is to move the energy.
So Stephanie, to get us in these habits of doing these kind of things, what's interesting is I don't know, I don't see it as coping. Like I think it just has to be a part of life. This is how we're programmed, and that these things are the offset. I don't look at it as like a stigma. It's just who we are. It's in our programming, so we have to do those things that kind of balance us out. Uh, so what does that mean for our kids? Obviously, a lot of these are transferable. You can teach even my kids, I can teach them certain things, breathing, relaxing, what's right now. What have you seen in terms of, I don't want to call it an industry, but in this field where there is or might be focus on kids, on youth, about preparing them with these kind of tools? Is it prevalent? I mean, is it where it should be? What do you think?
Well, I'll tiptoe around this,
Yeah, yeah.
because I really feel very, very strongly about this. I was telling you before we started recording, John, that long before, again, I never planned on writing a book, but long before I wrote the book, I had talked to several people about, okay, how do I get into schools to teach this stuff? Because when we can teach kids when they're little how to emotionally regulate, it changes everything, right? The little girl that I showed you the picture of getting that shot, now that she knows, I think she was 11 years old when I worked with her. She knows at 11 years old that she can conquer anything in her life. It it hurts my heart that your 6-year-old is going to school and is being subjected to these these drills of an active shooter. Like, what? Right?
Yeah.
How much more terrifying can that be? And so I can't change that, but what I can do is, okay, let's integrate this into the curriculum. Let's integrate this so that the kids, yes, sad fact that we have to do these active shooter drills, but where's the ballast? Where's the okay, here's how we try and deal with and navigate with this. Some teachers bring it into the classroom and, mwah, bless you. I told you I have this initiative with the book that like a Tom's socks or Tom's shoes or Bomba's
Mhm.
socks,
Mhm.
buy a book, donate a book, and that I donate books to schools or organizations, even colleges, that will help get these skills to the kids, because it will make a difference. Kids, teens, young adults are the ones who are the most affected by what we've been dealing with these past several years. And that is going to affect the next generation and the next generation.
Yeah.
And so, for you as a young parent, what a gift you're going to give your kids. I didn't have this stuff to be
Mm.
able to share with my kids. And my son, who I found out later, I didn't know at the time, all through his high school years would call me to other people the woo woo crackpot because, oh, my mom's a hypnotist,
Yeah.
she's a woo woo
Yeah.
crackpot. Now he understands, oh, there might be a little bit of wisdom here. But he came home from college one time. He was like, did you start smoking weed? I said, no, but thanks for noticing, because I had chilled out so much. And it's because I had really, it didn't just, it's not like I had this epiphany one day. I'm like, oh, okay, I can just use these techniques. It was from practicing, practicing, practicing. And now, do you think I ever experience anxiety? Of course I do. Just because I wrote that book does not mean I don't experience it.
Mm.
We cannot escape it. It's part of the human condition. However, by putting these skills in place, just a couple of them, putting them in place, it can help us prepare for what's to come. So, in the case of kids, when it's okay, you're feeling anxious about this test, let's all do some tapping. You might know it as emotional freedom technique. There I know there's a teacher, from years ago was doing this with her kids before they would take a test, and their scores were higher. Well, there's a direct correlation there. So for kids who are, again, your kids are never going to know a time without this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They're never going to know a time. This is me showing my granny part here. My daughter is 33 now, and when she was 4, we still lived in South Florida. And a kid down the block came over. We had the kids over to play at our house. Kid down the block came over with this thing, and it was like this game that he was holding in his hand. And I was like, that doesn't look good, because he's off in the corner with this thing and
Yeah.
everybody else is over there. Then fast forward 10 years later, 14 years old, MySpace and LiveJournal was coming on, and my daughter's friends called me stalker mom because I was like, "Oh no, you give me the passwords. You are not putting your information out on this, that anybody can see."
Yeah.
And another girl with my daughter's same first name, 14 years old, at another school in our town, met somebody on the internet, went to the Danbury Fair Mall, and was strangled to death. And so I've watched this arc with the technology. And so again, I'm not saying, "Ooh, technology's bad,"
No, of
but
course not, but
we
in
need to
moderation.
be able to balance it. And with the
Yeah.
kids, all right, they're not even learning how to write cursive anymore. And from a neuroscience part, from a brain part, that's not good because when we handwrite things, and literally, this was handwritten, pen and paper, because when we handwrite things, it wires it into our brain differently. So with the kids, I'm not saying, you can't say keep them away from devices. It's just not part of the world, right?
Yeah.
But balance it with, okay, oh, everybody, we're at dinner time. Everybody take a moment. What's right now? It's simple. And you
Yeah.
get to do that on a regular basis. And, your 6-year-old son is having a meltdown. You say, okay, let's just take a moment, take a breath. What's right now? I'm gonna have ice cream after dinner. Okay, that's right, and it
Yeah,
changes the
absolutely.
mood.
Absolutely. No, it's incredible, especially just the generational cultural differences between the way that I was brought up in my family, an immigrant family, to where they couldn't relate to the culture. They couldn't communicate with me in the language of the culture. There was the language barrier. Like it was just so far removed. They didn't know what the world was all about. To me, now having lived it, and now with this set of tools, it's going to be a very different. Am I going to nail it? Like you said, you're not going to nail everything, but I'm going to at least try. So it's good to have those tools in my back pocket or front pocket because it's just gonna. I think it just again, I don't see it as coping with something that should be stigmatized. I just think it's like you said, the human condition. It's in our DNA. We were just putting off for so long how to actually deal with it and live with it. Where now it's just like we can't afford to do that anymore because of everything that's coming at us in the world.
Right. I totally agree. And I love that you're not into the word coping because it's not in my vocabulary either. Coping to me sounds like it's like just kind of pushing it over here, like, all right, this is. And, I know from my personal experience, I know from 17 years of experience with clients that, pushing it to the side, it's like pushing a beach ball down in a pool. Phew, it's going to pop up
Yeah,
over here,
yeah,
right?
and I don't not use coping because like, oh, I found a new word. Everybody's always on to the next word, but like failure, coping just doesn't make sense because it's not representative of what it is. Like failure, what happened? You tried something, and what happened? It didn't work out. Failure
And,
just failure just sounds nasty, like you're a loser. Like no, you
well,
were
and
brave enough to try something,
and
and it
how
didn't
many
work
times
out.
and how many times did Einstein fail,
Exactly. So
right?
with coping,
Again,
like I have to. What is it that I don't like about coping? I guess maybe that it is seen as like huddled down and protecting yourself, kind of where it to me, it's like this is a part of life. So instead of coping like this, like trying to guard yourself, you have to find the tools. To me, it's living, like living skills, not coping
yeah.
skills, but
Oh, I
living skills.
love
Like
that.
you have to like navigate through these waters. And
Okay, John, I'm gonna pinch that from you. I love that.
that's fine. I love that. Stephanie, in writing this book, just a few more questions. In writing this book, what have you learned in that time since you wrote the book? Maybe as you were writing the book, did things evolve in your mind where you looked at them differently? What have you taken away from writing this book?
Great question. John, you are really good at this.
Just
So
curious.
so again, I am not a great writer. I must thank my dear friend Donna Cravata, who was my editor. She took this, I had this pile of stuff, and then she polished it like a diamond. I'm very, very proud of it. And again, not from an ego point, but from like she really shined it up and helped me to see that, she's the one who said, let's put them in alphabetical order so people don't even have to read the whole book, right? She's the one who helped me to see that just pick a couple. Like I would have been like a fire hose, like, here, you got to learn all of these. And she was like, no, put them in alphabetical order, have them pick. I think we said three or four, and now I'm down to like two or three, just because,
Yeah.
simple works. So I've really learned that it's not about how many different ways you do it, it's finding what works best for you. And that's going to change. So, again, exercise and nature are huge, right at the top of my list, along with breathing and spirituality. But then there's days when, like, okay, maybe I'm feeling like I need a little extra help. You can see Miss Maggie. And so I'll use some of my essential oil blends. So it's about finding what works for you that day, that week, as opposed to, okay, well, these are what I do. Well, if that's not
Yeah.
working for me, I better be able to find something else.
Yeah, we're all so different. Our experiences are so different with anything, even with coaching. I mean, the same technique, the same conversation that works with one person isn't going to work with the next. So, I mean, this is a great offering of tools, but yeah, people kind of have to put together their own toolkit, and it can be trial and error. If one doesn't work out, it doesn't mean none of them are going to work out. You just have to figure out what works best for you. And
Well,
I think you mentioned before, like, it all depends where you are in your life as well. Because maybe 10 years ago, a certain set would have helped, but now the anxiety is a little different. So now it's a different mixture of tools that will help me. It's just that we evolve so quickly and so much.
and for your listeners and also for you, John, uh, find an accountability buddy, right? If you're watching or listening to this and you're thinking, oh, okay, that sounds kind of nice, the best gift you can give yourself is to either have somebody watch this with you or give them the highlights, give them the book, and say, okay, for the next 7 days minimum, I would say go for at least 30 days. Accountability, check in each and every day. Oh, what are you doing? What's working for you? Stephen Covey said, yeah, accountability breeds responsibility, and not responsibility the way we've always known about it, but to respond. That we want to respond to the actions that bring us anxiety as opposed to react, react, react. And
Exactly.
when I do this, for companies and stuff, I always say, buddy up with somebody and action, 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 because without action, nothing's going to change.
Absolutely. So what's next for your writing, Stephanie?
I don't know. I didn't plan on writing the first book, so who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe,
Something will come to mind. I mean, if this one didn't come to you until later in your career and you got it out in like 2 months or however many days it was, I mean, it's just a matter of being uh, just reminded or triggered at a certain moment, and that idea will pop up.
well, maybe the next one is Goodbye Anxiety, Hello Freedom for kids.
Yeah. I think that would be amazing. That'd be amazing, and that is the next focus. I mean, right parallel to focusing on myself, or ourselves, adults. I mean, we have to be there just to provide those toolkits for them. That opening up that conversation, at least the conversation. They don't need to have the prescription that works 100%, but they need to have the ability to be curious, to ask questions, and know that they can ask questions about why they're feeling how they're feeling, or just expressing what they're feeling.
Yes, definitely.
All right,
Well said.
no pressure, but a year from now, I want to be having this conversation on that book.
Yeah, no pressure, John. What a
So
fabulous
fun,
conversation. Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you for being here. In wrapping up, is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners and viewers? Anything that I might have missed?
I don't think so. You asked some phenomenal questions. So thank you so much, John. If people want to get a couple of the techniques for free from the book, they can go to 3simpleshifts.com. It's either the number three or three written out, or just go to my website, stephaniedelfonzo.com. And, again, get them, Of course, I would love for you to buy the book, but get the free ones. Like, just it's kind of like the tasters at Costco. Let me just give you a little taste of this. If you just get these three simple shifts and you start actioning them, it will change your life. And then it's going to ripple out to those in your family, those that you work with, those in your community. And the more of us that can be that little calm
Mm.
center of when you drop the pebble in and then the ripples out, the
Yeah.
more that we can be that calm center, the more we're going to impact those around us.
Yeah, and there's so many habits, like working out is one of them, but working out really takes a while to get into traditional thinking about working out. But these exercises, reading through them myself, I can tell you that it only takes a moment to feel the rewards, the impact, just to feel lighter, to feel less tense. So just another selling point is that these can be very short, very quick actions. So thank you, Stephanie, for providing them in such a collection.
Thank you, John. You asked some great questions. Thank you so much.
I'm just curious to why people think the way they think, how they got to where they are. Just we're all so different that social media just doesn't capture everything. So I want to dig in deep with my guests and just find out what makes them tick.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. So thank you for sitting down with me. And to all, thank you for listening to our conversation regarding Stephanie's book, Goodbye Anxiety, Hello Freedom. If there's anything that I might have missed, as usual, please let me know. Send me an email. I'll have Stephanie's contact information along with the post, the publishing of the podcast, the audio, and the video. I only have her for, even though it's a long amount of time, there's so many things that she said before that we could dive into and spend a day on. But if there's anything that I might have missed, just let me know and I'll reach out to her as well. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves. So much shit is going on. Um, yeah, I can't urge that enough. It comes up a lot in the conversations that I've had recently. There's so much going on. We don't know how to take care of ourselves. It's not just coping, but it's living. This is almost like a new normal of this society and environment that we're living with. So please take care of yourselves. If I can help in any way, please reach out. Until the next episode, we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.